Hi guys, and welcome to another CHIP technical tutorial. In this edition, what we're going to do is we're going to build on some of the work we've done previously, which was specifically installing Node.js and Node-RED, and now we're going to tackle the ability to output GPIO signals from within Node-RED as a result of events happening. So specifically, we're going to blink some LEDs, but we're going to do that from within a Node-RED environment. You're going to like this. This is kind of cool stuff. So with Node-RED installed, the next thing we have to do is we have to install the additions to Node-RED that provide the GPIO work. So within my Node-RED directory, Node-RED, Node modules, Node-RED, where the contents looks like this, I'm now going to perform an npm install. Specifically, I'm going to run npm install node-red-contrib-gpio. Also, I'm going to install a package called Johnny5, and I'm also going to install a package called C.H.I.P. And while these are cooking, I'm going to explain what these are. So we'll start with Johnny5. Now, Johnny5 is a JavaScript package that allows us to interact with back-end modules such as GPIOs and accelerometers and LEDs and all kinds of things. Now, one of the elegant things about Johnny5 is that it's single board computer agnostic. So it runs with CHIP, and it runs with Raspberry Pi, and it runs with Arduino, and it runs with all kinds of things. Now, because it's single board computer agnostic, we have to tell it what kind of board that it's going to run with. Now, CHIP being so new in the environment, the CHIP board configuration for Johnny5 is not supplied as part of the Johnny5 package. Instead, it's supplied as a separate package called C.H.I.P. So if we're looking here at what we're installing the Johnny5 package, and then we're installing the board definitions for Johnny5 for CHIP. And finally, we're installing the Node-RED plugins that allow us to perform GPIO through Node-RED through Johnny5 using the C.H.I.P package. Now, this installation at the npm level, this takes about 10 minutes to complete. So this is where we start these commands going. npm install node-red contrib gpio, Johnny5 and C.H.I.P, and then go make ourselves a cup of tea and then come back in about 10 minutes. So I'm going to pause the video here and come back when it's all installed. Okay, some 10 minutes later, hopefully we see that everything has now installed cleanly. What remains is for us to start Node-RED. So let's see, run node-red.js. The Node-RED runtime is now starting up. That takes a few minutes to come up, and while it's coming up, I'll just talk quietly, watching the startup messages. Very interesting. We see that we're at Node-RED version 0.14, Node.js 4.4.7. We're running on a Linux 4.4.11 build, running on my chip, and Node-RED has now started. Now, what remains is for us to bring over a browser and connect to our chip at port 1880. And when we bring up Node-RED, looks like Node-RED, great. But what I want you to notice is that we have some new building blocks. These building blocks, the ones labeled GPIO here, are building blocks that were not previously present. Those were added to the Node-RED environment because we added our components. So let's add in one of these GPIO building blocks. There it is. When I double click it, up comes the settings for this building block. Now, the first thing we're going to add here is the board definition. We only need to add that once. It asks us what kind of board are we using? What kind of single board computer? We select CHIP. The others are built into the Johnny5 environment. CHIP was the one that we added. So we say chip, and I'll give it a name, and we'll call this board definition, we'll call it chip. Now that we've told the node that it's going to be connecting to chip, now we specify which pin is it going to work with. And in our case, it's going to be XIO P0. That's one of the I/O chips on the pin. Hit the done button, and now we have a building block on our canvas that when sent either an input of true or false will toggle the value of that signal on the corresponding GPIO pin. Now to demonstrate that happening, I'm going to bring in an inject node here. I'm going to bring up its properties. I'm going to say it's going to inject a Boolean value true. And when we click this injector, that's going to set the value to true. I'm going to add another injector. We're going to open its properties, set it to be a Boolean. And in this case, I'm going to set it to be false. And now, when we click on that injector, it's going to set the value to false. Hit the deploy button. This will deploy our solution to Node Red. And now, if we click the true activity, the LED light goes on. Look at that. If we click the false activity on our diagram, the light goes off. True, false, true, false. How cool is that? And didn't take any programming at all. Very elegant. Now I'll conclude this with some exciting work on browser input. So let's add an HTTP input node. Select its properties and say that its URL is going to be on. So the local URL is going to be on. And we'll add another URL and we'll say this URL is going to be off. Very simple. So it's going to be the local URL /on, the local URL /off. Now when we receive an HTTP request, we need to send a response back. What we send back as a response doesn't really matter, but we'll send a response back, okay? So this is its own flow. So how does that relate to the GPIOs? Well, now we'll add that in. We'll add a change activity. And we'll call this one set to true. And we'll set the message payload to be the Boolean value true. And we'll create another one here. And we'll set this one to be set false. And we'll set the data type on it to be a Boolean. And we'll set it to be false. Done. And now we'll wire these guys together. So when a request comes in on HTTP URL on, we'll set the Boolean to be true, and we'll propagate that onwards to the GPIO pin. When we get a request coming in for false, we'll set the payload to be false, and we'll propagate that to the GPIO output. Now we've made changes as indicated by these dots here. We've made changes to our flow. We'll redeploy it to the Node Red environment. And now what we'll do is we'll bring up another browser requirement, and we'll hit this to the on URL. Now when I hit on, the LED comes on. And when I toggle this and hit the URL off, the LED goes off. So now immediately we can see that we are able to trigger the GPIO output of our chip device by connecting to a GPIO. How easy was that? How absolutely gorgeous was that? Couldn't have been easier. Couldn't have been easier. Really nice. Okay, so now we see that we are able to receive input requests, true and false, which cause the flashing of the LEDs as we choose. And using these URLs, we can now set requests, send requests to the GPIO via browser requests. So I hope you found this useful. I'm going to be making lots more technical tutorials in CHIP in the future. And thanks for watching, guys. Talk to you all soon. Bye-bye.